Zainab grabbed Mama Ifyunania's hair, and before anyone could even process what was happening, she slammed her face straight into her own 80th birthday cake. Cream exploded. Candles went out. A laugh broke out, then spread like a cruel reflex. But just a few seconds later, the entire room fell silent. No one stepped forward. No one helped her up, because in that moment, people no longer saw a joke. They began to see their true selves. Mama Ifyunania stood there, her face covered in white cream, her eyes closed as if she was trying to hold on to the last fragments of her dignity before it shattered completely in front of the crowd. And then, the mansion doors closed behind her. The car pulled away. No one followed. No one called her back. Because everyone felt something far more terrifying than what had just happened. When a mother leaves her home in silence, what leaves is not just a person, but the soul of the entire family. In the living room, the ruined birthday cake lay there, like undeniable evidence. The music cut off, the air turned heavy, and in the center of the room, Zainab dropped to her knees, not because anyone forced her, but because for the first time, she realized she had gone too far, to a point of no return, and Tund stood there in his perfect suit, with everything money could buy, yet completely powerless against the one thing he could never control. Consequences. A phone vibrated. Then another 15-second video began to spread. No edits, no explanation, but enough for the whole world to see the truth, and that's when the real nightmare began. Because some mistakes you think only happen in a closed room, but what you done to realize, it only takes one camera for the entire world to become a witness. If you believe that, the way you treat the vulnerable is exactly how life will treat you back, then this story is not just a story. It's a warning. Hit subscribe now, so you done miss stories that will make you question who you really are. And before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching from in the world? Stay until the very last second, because the truth behind that 15-second video will change the way you see family forever. The next morning, the Bello mansion woke up to a silence so cold it was hard to breathe. No clinking of cutlery against porcelain. No aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifting from the grand kitchen. No familiar footsteps of the staff moving through the halls. Everything was still there. Expensive, perfect, polished. But the life inside it was gone. As if the soul of the house had been pulled out overnight. A maid stood in the hallway, holding a tray of tea, but did tea dare knock? Another passed through the living room, her steps so light they barely touched the floor. Everyone knew. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. Something had broken, and it could not be fixed. Inside a dressing room as large as a fashion showroom, Zainab sat frozen in front of the mirror. Yesterday's flawless makeup was gone, replaced by a pale face and red, sleepless eyes. The expensive silk dress still hung there, but no one admired it anymore. In her hand, her phone kept vibrating. Messages, calls, notifications. Relentless, unstoppable. She opened the screen, and the world collapsed on her. The video. 15 seconds, no cuts, no filters, no excuses, just her hand, and the face of a mother being forced into her own birthday cake, once, then again, and again, from another angle. Someone filmed from behind. Someone filmed from the table. Someone filmed up close. It was no longer a moment. It became evidence. And evidence does not lie. The comments flooded in like a storm surge. What kind of person is this? She is 80 years old. I can believe this. Disgusting. This isn't a joke, this is humiliation. Zainab scrolled. Her fingers trembled so badly she missed taps, slipping across the screen. She read. And the more she read, the more she felt herself being stripped bare in front of millions of eyes. No one called her beautiful anymore. No one asked what brand she was wearing. No one admired her luxurious life. They called her a monster, heartless, the woman who humiliated her mother-in-law on her 80th birthday. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. No, this can be happening. She threw the phone onto the bed, as if it were burning her hands. Then turned sharply. Tunde, you have to do something. The man standing by the window didn't turn around. Morning light touched his back, but never reached his face. "Do what?" he asked, his voice low and dry as sand. "Take the video down," she nearly screamed. "Call a lawyer. Sue them. Make them delete everything." Silence. Tun turned his head. His eyes were no longer those of a husband. No protection. No defense. No familiar nod whenever she crossed the line. Only cold clarity. "Take it down for what?" he asked. "So people won't see it anymore. They've already seen it." That sentence wasn't allowed, but it landed like a hammer. Zainab froze. She opened her mouth, but no words came out, because for the first time, she couldn't control the situation. Couldn't control the man in front of her. Couldn't undo what had already been done. By noon, the consequences began to take shape. An email arrived. Short, cold, emotionless. "We can no longer continue our partnership with a family involved in a serious ethical scandal." Tund read it. No reaction. He simply placed the phone down. Then another call. "The bank. We need to reassess the terms of our support." An investment fund. Pulled out. A longtime partner. Stopped answering calls. A relative. Vanished as if they had never existed. One door closed. Then another. No explosions. No drama. But certain, bit by bit, the Bellow empire began to crack. Tun stood in the living room, where just last night there had been lights, music, laughter. Now, only a table remained, with dried cake smeared across it like a stain that refused to disappear. He looked at it, and for the first time in his life, he understood something money had never taught him. Reputation is not something you build with money. It's something you destroy in a single moment. Across the room, Zainab still sat there, but now, she was no longer the woman who controlled the entire house, just a person, slowly realizing that some mistakes can never be erased, some moments can never be undone, and some prices you have to pay before you even understand that you've lost everything. Outside, the video kept spreading. The comments kept pouring in. The world kept watching. And inside the mansion that once symbolized power, a cold truth was beginning to surface. They did collapse in one night. They collapsed, one door at a time, while the Bellow mansion was sinking into the suffocating smell of panic, calls flooding in, doors of influence slamming shut one after another. Somewhere else, the morning began with sunlight. Ibrahim Danjuma's home sat deep behind rows of tall trees, quiet as if it belonged to an entirely different world from the loud, judgmental chaos unfolding outside. Large glass doors opened to a garden stretched under soft light. White flowers swayed gently in the breeze. The sound of water from a fountain flowed steadily, so subtle, it calmed the heart without one even knowing why. Mama Ifanania sat by that window, her back straight, though her aged hands rested on her lap, still slightly curled from years of living in caution. She wore clean, soft new clothes, carrying a faint scent of soap. Her silver hair had been neatly combed. The faint red mark on her forehead, where she had been forced into the cake, had been treated. To anyone looking in, she seemed cared for, but only she knew. What unsettled her most was the spacious house. Wasn't the luxurious furniture, wasn't the velvet chair so soft it felt unfamiliar beneath her. It was kindness. Here, every servant who entered bowed slightly, and called her mama with genuine respect, not the forced politeness reserved for an inconvenient old woman. Breakfast was brought on a clean wooden tray. Hot tea, soft porridge, sliced fruit, and a neatly folded white cloth beside it. No one placed her in a corner. No one sighed at having to serve her. No one acted as if her presence was a burden. The feeling was so foreign that Mama Ifunania sat for a long time without touching the spoon. She simply watched the thin steam rising from the tea, as if it belonged to someone else's life. A life where people are treated like human beings. Steady footsteps sounded behind her. Ibrahim Danjuma entered the dining room without assistance, without a phone pressed to his ear, without the polished armor of a man used to controlling others with a few short words. Today, He wore a simple white shirt, sleeves slightly rolled to his wrists. His face showed the exhaustion of a sleepless night. Yet that simplicity made his power feel heavier power that didn't need to be displayed to exist. He stopped in front of her, then bent slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet. "Mama," he asked softly, "did you sleep well last night?" Mama Ifunanya looked up. Something slow and unspoken flickered in her eyes. She had lived too long in a world where people only asked if she had finished her tasks, taken her medicine, or moved carefully enough not to inconvenience others. She couldn't remember the last time anyone asked if she had slept well. "I did," she answered quietly, then almost immediately added like a reflex carved into her bones. "You don't have to do all this." Ibrahim pulled out a chair and sat across from her. He looked at her for a few seconds, like someone trying to keep his voice steady. "I haven't done anything yet." That answer made her aged lashes flicker. She was about to say something, but Abraham continued, his voice lowering, as if stepping into a memory he never revealed to others. "I am only repaying a very small part," he said, "of a debt I can never fully repay in this lifetime." Outside, sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting soft golden streaks across the table. Everything was peaceful. But inside Mama Ifunanya, something old began to stir like ashes touched by wind. Kano, an old name, buried under time, yet alive the moment it was touched. She remembered the red dirt alley that turned to mud in the rain, the low roof of the old house, the nights when wind lashed against her face, cold slipping through every crack in the walls. She remembered tending the fire, when she saw a small figure outside, pressed against the wall, like a creature on the verge of collapse. It was a boy, so thin his shoulders jutted beneath a torn shirt, eyes sunken from hunger, lips pale. But what she remembered most was his gaze, the gaze of a child who had grown used to being invisible. She had opened the door, placed a bowl of thin soup, made from the last of what she had into his hands, spread a small mat near the stove so he wouldn't have to sleep in the rain that night. And when the boy ate, trying to hide his shame, she had spoken gently, like she would to her own child. "You don't have to die on the street just because no one sees you." Back then, she hadn't thought she was doing anything extraordinary. A woman like her had too much to worry about to think in grand meanings. She simply saw a starving child and did what her heart would not allow her to ignore. She didn't think she was saving a future. Didn't think that boy would one day become Ibrahim Danjuma. Didn't think life silently records every act of kindness without telling anyone. Mama Ifunanya slowly closed her eyes. When she opened them again, Ibrahim was still looking at her. Not the gaze of a wealthy man toward someone beneath him, but the gaze of someone who remembers exactly who lifted him from darkness. That afternoon, as sunlight stretched long across the stone floor, Ibrahim returned holding an old wooden box. It wasn't valuable in appearance. The corners were worn, the surface scratched, but the way he carried it made it clear. What was inside weighed far more than it looked. He placed it carefully in front of her. "Mama," he said softly, "I think you should have this." Mama Ifunanya looked at him for a moment, then slowly opened the lid. The scent of old paper and aged wood rose instantly, a smell that could pull an entire life backward. Inside were yellowed documents, an old savings book, a land sale receipt from more than 20 years ago, and at the bottom, a stack of tuition receipts. She picked them up. Her aged eyes moved across the faded lines of text, then stopped. The name on the paper cut through her memory like a silent blade. Tund Bellow. Her hand froze. The space around her seemed to compress. The fountain still flowed outside. The curtains still moved with the wind. But for Mama Ifunanya, everything felt distant, like it was happening somewhere else. Because these were documents she never thought she would see again. Records of the years she sold the last piece of land bearing her parents' name to pay for her son's education. Receipts from semesters where she lied to Tun, telling him the money came from a distant relative because she didn't want him to grow up feeling burdened by debt. Proof of nights she went hungry, of mornings she walked to the market with swollen feet, head held high trading everything she had for his future. All of it here, intact, silent, like a piece of truth that survived time waiting for this moment to be revealed. I had someone track them down, Ibrahim said quietly, and I think it's time the truth is seen. Mama Ifunanya didn't respond. She simply stared at the papers in her hands. Her lips moved but no sound came out, because inside that old wooden box, there wasn't tea, just paper. It held an entire lifetime of sacrifice Tund had never fully known. The real cost behind the suits, the contracts, the parties, everything he believed he had built from nothing. And deeper still, it held a secret she had carried for years. Like a wound she never allowed anyone to touch. A secret that could do more than hurt Tund. It could shatter the last piece of pride he had left. If the truth ever came out, some secrets are not kept in safes, not in bank accounts, not in late-night calls between lawyers and businessmen. They live in old papers gone yellow with age, in the trembling handwriting of an elderly mother, in sacrifices so quiet that even the person whose life was built on them never truly knew what he was standing on. That afternoon, as the sunlight outside the Bellow mansion faded into a tired, yellow haze, a security guard brought in a thick envelope, with no clear sender's name on it. It only the sealed mark of Ibrahim Danjuma's office. Tund was sitting in his study. That room had always been the place where he felt strongest. A polished black wooden desk, stone-paneled walls, shelves of imported liquor, photographs with business partners, awards, certificates, visible symbols of a man who had climbed far beyond his origins. In that room, he was used to making decisions that forced others to wait, bow, negotiate. But today, not even that room could hide the exhaustion on his face. His shirt was unbuttoned to the second button. His tie had been thrown aside. His eyes were dark from a sleepless night. The phone on his desk kept lighting up with incoming calls before going dark again, like an erratic heartbeat. He stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. At first, he assumed it was just another blow from Ibrahim, a legal document, a warning, another reminder that his family was now in that man's hands more than he had ever imagined. But when he unfolded the first page, Tund stopped. An old savings book, a receipt, then another receipt. So old the edges were frayed, the ink faded by time. Some pages still carried deep fold marks worn into the paper. He frowned, confused. Then his eyes landed on a line with a name. Tund Bellow. The air in the room shifted. He leaned closer. It was a tuition receipt from his first year of university, the school he had attended, the exact academic year, the exact amount. He turned another page, then another. Semester payments appeared before him one after another, like slow, precise cuts. Each page was a year of his life. Each number was one more hardship his mother had silently carried without him ever truly asking how. Tund's hand tightened. Then he saw the thing that made his heart miss a beat. A land sale receipt. The piece of land on the outskirts. The small plot his father had left behind before he died. The land where, as a child, Tund had run barefoot through the mud each rainy season. The place his mother used to say was the last thing the family still had something for when bad days come. Tund stared at the paper. The sale date, the sale price, the signature. It was not a beautiful signature, not rounded, not strong. It leaned thin and fragile across the paper, as though the hand holding the pen had been so tired it struggled just to finish writing the name. Ifunanya Bellow. His throat went dry. An old memory burst open inside him the day he received his admission letter. He had thrown his arms around his mother in their sweltering little house and cried like a child. He remembered telling her he was going to change their lives, that he would lift her out of poverty, that he would never let her bow her head to anyone again. He remembered her smile, the smile of a woman who had nothing in her hands except faith in her son. Back then, He only knew the tuition was high, very high, high enough to make the dream feel impossible. But a few days later, his mother told him the money had been handled. She said someone she knew had helped. She told him not to worry. She told him his only job was to study hard. And he had believed her with relief, believed her the way a young man desperate to escape the suffocating limits of poverty wants to believe. Believed her so completely that he never asked another question. Now, sitting in the luxurious office he had built for himself, Tund finally understood. There had been no family friend, no miracle, only a mother who had quietly sold her last future to buy one for her son. He kept turning the pages. A stack of old medical papers, many of them so wrinkled he had to smooth them flat just to read them. Prescriptions for pain medication, follow-up appointments that had never been kept, small market receipts, expenses cut down to a brutal minimum. The papers said nothing out loud, but every single one of them screamed the same truth. While he was in school, dressed decently, moving among wealthy students, learning to speak and carry himself like someone from a higher class, his mother had been living with even less than before. She ate less. She bought less. She was in pain but didn't go to the hospital. She saved every coin. She cut every cost. She squeezed the life out of her own old age so his dream could breathe. Tund felt a sharp pounding at his temples. He pressed a hand to his forehead, but he couldn't stop the sensation that someone was peeling away a layer of skin from his mind. The memories kept coming. The day he graduated, the day he got his first job, the day he began receiving invitations to places he once only dared look at through glass. He had changed. At first, only a little. He stopped bringing his mother to crowded places as often. Then he told her not to wear those old clothes when guests were coming. Then he cut her off whenever she told old stories in front of his friends. Then he began feeling ashamed whenever her simple, humble voice rose in rooms filled with expensive perfume and polished small talk. He didn't call it shame. He called it appropriate. He called it the way things should be. He called it mother doesn't understand this world. But the truth was he had begun cutting his mother out of the picture of success. He was trying to hang before the world. When had it gone too far? Maybe it was the day he moved her out of the large, sunlit room into the small room at the end of the hallway, saying it would be quieter for an elderly person. Maybe it was the day he let the house staff decide when his mother would eat. Maybe it was every time he saw her awkward among elegant guests, and instead of stepping forward to hold her hand, he turned away because he was afraid people would see where he had come from. Or maybe it had passed the point of no return last night, when Zainab's hand grabbed his mother's hair, when her face was forced into her 80th birthday cake, when cream covered her silver hair, when the entire room fell silent, and he just stood there like a statue cast from cowardice, didn't rush forward, didn't shout, didn't stop it, didn't he protect the woman who had sold her whole life so he could stand in that room. Tund drew in a deep breath, but the air felt like knives in his lungs. Then he saw the letter. It lay at the bottom of the file, folded carefully into quarters. Thin paper, old, a few stains at the corners. He opened it. His mother's slanted handwriting appeared before him, deliberate and careful, as if every word had been written with the hesitation of someone unaccustomed to putting her heart on paper. I am not afraid of poverty. I am only afraid that my son may be gifted but never get the chance to step out of the cycle of poverty his mother was trapped in. If I have to sell everything so he can study, I will accept that. I only hope that one day he will live with decency. The room seemed to lose all sound. Tund read the last sentence again, then one more time. I only hope that one day he will live with decency, not wealth, not fame, not power, not becoming someone the world fears, only to live with decency. Such a small wish, it was almost unbearable. A mother who had sold land, sold the last security of her old age, sold her health, sold her peace of mind, yet what she wanted for her son was not money, only character. And he had failed at the smallest thing she ever asked for. Tun let the letter slip from his hand. It touched the floor without making much sound. But inside him, something collapsed. He did not cry at first. He did not scream. He simply sank into the chair, his back bent, his arms hanging uselessly. Like a man stripped bare down to the deepest part of himself, apart, even he had never wanted to face. He looked up at the photographs on the wall. Photos of signed deals, photos of awards, photos of handshakes, photos of smiles. Suddenly, all of them looked ridiculous, because now he could see the true foundation beneath them. Not his talent alone, not his solitary willpower, not the strength of a man who rose from nothing with his bare hands, the way he always liked to tell it, but his mother's old age, her last piece of land, the meals she skipped, the pain she endured in silence, an entire life worn down quietly, so he could bloom before the world. And the most horrifying truth of all, he had not only forgotten it, he had allowed the very woman who built his life out of her own flesh and sacrifice to be humiliated right in front of him. This time, the tears came, not violently, not loudly. They spilled slowly, hot and heavy, as if they had been trapped too long behind years of pride, ambition, and the habit of excusing himself. Tun bent forward, both hands covered his face, and for the first time in many years, he cried, not because of money, not because contracts were being canceled, not because of scandal, not because he feared losing status, not even because Ibrahim Danjuma was powerful. He cried because at last he understood who he truly was. A man in an expensive suit, standing in a luxurious mansion, speaking grandly about honor and family, and yet betraying the very mother who had given up her entire life so he could live a different one. And perhaps, among all the losses still waiting ahead, the most painful thing was not what he was about to lose. It was the truth that that mother had only ever hoped he would live with decency, and he had disappointed her in the cruelest way possible. Night fell very slowly. The sky outside was covered in a heavy charcoal gray, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable to happen. Streetlights cast long streaks of light across the car windows. The engine hummed steadily, but inside Tund, everything was in chaos. He drove himself. No chauffeur, no bodyguards, no calls made ahead to clear the way. No familiar outer shell of power, the one he had worn for years as a man who always appeared before the world in complete control. Tonight, for the first time in a very long time, Tund Bello no longer looked like a winner. The shirt he had thrown on in haste was wrinkled at the shoulders and cuffs. The top two buttons were undone, exposing the heavy rise and fall of his breathing at the base of his throat. His eyes were bloodshot after hours without sleep. His jaw was tight, but not with pride anymore, rather with the strain of a man, trying not to break before he arrived. The road to Ibrahim Danjuma's home was not far, but to Tund, it felt as long as a lifetime. Each street lamp slipping past the window felt like a marker pulling him backward through time. With every minute behind the wheel, another image of his mother came back to him, her thin hands setting a bowl of soup before him when he was little, her bent back after long afternoons at the market, her tired but radiant smile when he held his university acceptance letter, her quiet eyes when he began taking her out less and less, her awkwardness among the elegant guests in the he had once promised would be the place where she could finally live in peace. And then, the final moment came back to him, Zainab's hand tightening in his mother's silver hair, her face shoved into the birthday cake, the laughter, the sound of candles going out, his silence. Tund gripped the steering wheel so hard that his knuckles turned white. It was no longer a memory. It was a sentence. The gates of Ibrahim Danjuma's home rose before him, tall, firm, closed, like the boundary between two worlds. One world where he had always walked with the confidence of money and status, and another where none of those things were enough to hide him from himself. The gatekeeper recognized the car, but the gates did not open right away. Tun sat still behind the wheel, listening to his own heartbeat inside the silent car. The feeling of being made to wait was unfamiliar and bitter. He, a man for whom doors had always opened, chairs had always been pulled out, welcomes always arranged, now had to wait for permission. And for the first time, he understood. There are doors that do not open because of your name. They open only because of truth. A few minutes later, the gates slowly parted. The car rolled into a wide courtyard, bathed in soft light. There was no music, no staff lined up in greeting, none of the theatrical display the wealthy so often use to prove their power. There was only a silence so clean, so deep, that every human step felt more real inside it. Tun stepped out of the car. His legs felt as heavy as lead. He crossed the courtyard so slowly that it seemed if he stopped for even 1 second, he would not have the strength to keep going. The night air brushed his face, cold, but it could not wake him more fully. Because what was making him dizzy was not this night, but the truth he had learned far too late. The door opened. Tund stepped into the living room, and he saw his mother. Mama Ifananya was sitting near a large window, where the warm yellow light from inside the house fell over her shoulders like a thin shawl. She wore simple, clean clothes. Her silver hair was brushed neatly back. Her face no longer carried cream, no longer bore the wild humiliation of the night before. What remained was only the deep exhaustion of someone who had traveled so far through pain that she no longer had the strength to react. With tears, the sight of her made Tun stop cold. The air in his chest locked up. He had prepared hundreds of lines on the drive over, hundreds of apologies, hundreds of ways to tell her that he understood now, that he was sorry, that he was in pain. But now, standing before that woman, he could not say a single word, because some shame is too great for language to make it past the throat. Mama Ifanania looked up at her son. She did not startle. She did not burst into tears. She did not rush forward to embrace him like the mothers in easy stories people like to imagine. She only looked at him, a very deep look, very painful. It was that stillness, more than anything else, that nearly made Tund collapse where he stood. He took one step forward, then another. Each step felt like he was walking across pieces of his own past, until he reached the middle of the room, where Ibrahim Danjuma stood quietly, in the distance like a witness without stepping in, without interrupting, simply allowing the truth to travel the full length of its path. And then, Tun dropped to his knees. No one told him to do it. No one forced him. Not for appearances. Not to create a dramatic moment. Not because he feared Ibrahim was watching. Not because his contracts were collapsing. He knelt. Because for the first time, his legs could no longer carry the weight of his own shame. Mother, the word came out broken, dry, as though it had to pass through a field of thorns just to escape him. Tears surged instantly, tightening his voice. I know now, he said, but the last syllables dissolved into his trembling breath. I know everything now. Mama Ifananya remained silent. Her eyes stayed on her son's collapsing face, as if she were looking at someone both familiar and strange. Tunda lifted his head. At some point, his face had become wet with tears. I didn't know you sold the land, he said, his voice shaking so badly each word sounded ready to snap. I didn't know you lived like that so I could study. I didn't know. I truly didn't know. He swallowed, but the knot in his throat only grew larger. I thought I got here on my own. Silence fell. Then he gave a small, bitter laugh, like a man mocking himself. I thought my success was because I was talented. I thought these suits, that house, those relationships, I built them myself. He wiped harshly at his tears, but more kept coming. I thought you were just an old woman living in my house. The moment the last sentence left his mouth, it hit him like a slap. He bowed his head, shoulders shaking. But you were the foundation of my whole life. The room went completely still. Even the sound of the wind outside seemed to retreat. Tun could no longer hold himself upright on his knees. He folded forward, both hands braced against the floor, his back curved. Like a man carrying the full weight of all the years, he had betrayed what was right. Mother, he choked out. I'm sorry. There was no self-control left. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I am sorry I stayed silent. I am sorry I stood there and let them humiliate you right in front of me. His voice shattered into pieces. I'm sorry I let you live in my home like a shadow. I'm sorry I was ashamed of the person who made my life possible. I am sorry I only knew how to make money and not how to be a human being. Tears fell steadily onto the polished floor. Tun bent even lower. This was no longer a man kneeling beautifully for the sake of others seeing it. This was a human being truly collapsing. I don't dare ask you to forgive me tonight, he said, his voice raw. I only ask you please don't erase me from your heart. That was the sentence that made Mama Ifunania's aged lashes tremble. Very slightly, but enough to reveal the shock moving inside her. Because in this world, when a child wounds a parent down to the bone, the most terrifying thing is no longer being scolded, rejected, or punished. It is the day when the parent no longer hurts enough to even blame them. When they simply close the door of their heart in silence. And that child is left outside forever. For a long time, Mama Ifunania said nothing. She looked at her son collapsed at her feet. The man who had once been tall and strong, once been her pride, once been the reason she endured poverty, illness, loneliness, and old age was now breaking apart like a child. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and hoarse. But every word was so clear it felt cold. Do you know what hurt me most? Tun did not dare raise his head. He only shook it faintly, tears falling to the floor. Not the cake. Not the room full of laughter. Not Zainab, she paused. It was only a short pause, but sharp as a blade hunned carefully over time. It was that you stood there, she said, her eyes never leaving his face, and did not step forward. Tun stopped breathing. She had not said it with a scream, not with accusation, not with rage. She said it with truth. And because of that, it cut deeper than any fury could have. A straight, slow blade, with no theatrics, yet enough to split open the last piece of personhood Tund was still trying to hold together. He broke into sobs, no longer trying to suppress them, no longer holding his voice steady, no longer protecting his image. Mother, he cried out like a lost child. Mother, please. But Mama Ifunanya did not rescue him from that pain. She let him remain inside it, because there are truths that only reveal a person to himself after he has walked all the way through the deepest part of pain. She looked down at her son. Her eyes reddened, but they were not weak. You can rebuild a house, she said slowly. You can rebuild a career. You can earn money again. You can recover a reputation if you are good enough. She stopped. But there are moments in life, her voice lowered, when if you do not stand on the side of what is right at that moment, then no amount of apology later can make it disappear. The whole room grew heavier. Even Ibrahim, a man who had seen every kind of power and collapse in his lifetime, said nothing, because this was no longer just a mother speaking to her son. It was a judgment, not only for Tund, but for everyone who has ever believed that silence in the face of cruelty is innocence. Shh. For everyone who has stood by while the vulnerable were trampled and told themselves it was none of their business. For everyone who only wakes up when consequences knock on their own door. Tund lifted his head, eyes red, face soaked with tears. What do I do, he asked, his voice barely holding together. What do I do to make this right? Mama Ifunanya looked at him for a long time. There was no cruelty in her eyes, but neither was there the softness of a mother ready to pat his head and say everything would be fine. There are things that cannot be fixed with words, she answered. Tund went still. She continued, slowly, forcing him to hear every word with his whole soul. You do not need to prove anything to me with tears tonight. Tears come easily. What is hard is whether you have the courage to live differently starting tomorrow. Tund stared at her without blinking. Do you have the courage to stand on the side of what is right when it costs you your pride? She asked. Do you have the courage to let go of what is wrong, even if it is your wife, your money, the name you built? Do you have the courage to pay the price to become a decent human being? Or are you only hurting because this time the truth has made you ashamed? Each question moved through the room like a hammer striking stone. No one rescued him from them, because they were questions only a truly repentant person could stay and answer. Tund lowered his head, his whole body trembling. That night, in that softly lit and silent room, a man finally fell to his knees, not before power, not before public opinion, not before the fear of losing everything, but before truth. And sometimes, that is the hardest kneeling of a person's life, because kneeling before truth means that from that moment on, you no longer have the right to live the way you used to. The next morning, the sun rose beautifully, a beauty so gentle it felt almost cruel, because after a night in which too many things had fallen apart, the light still arrived right on time, calmly spilling across Ibrahim Danjuma's garden, gliding over the tea table on the veranda, touching the dew still clinging to the leaves, then settling in warm golden patches across the polished stone floor. Everything looked so peaceful that, if you did not know what had happened, you might have thought this was just an ordinary morning for people living in order and decency. But none of the three people seated around that tea table were the same as they had been the day before. Mama Ifanania sat upright in a woven chair, her aged hands wrapped around a warm teacup. Thin steam rose from it, brushed her face, then disappeared. She wore a simple cream-colored outfit. Her silver hair was neatly combed. Her face still carried the fatigue of someone who had not yet recovered from a wound that did not live in the body. To her right sat Ibrahim. He did not speak much. He simply sat there, quiet, like a support that did not need to display its strength. From time to time, he looked at Mama Ifunanya with the gaze of someone who understood that some pain cannot be soothed with words, only honored through silent presence. Across from her sat Tund. He had been there since very early, before the first light had fully touched the garden. No more phone vibrating endlessly in his hand. No more calls to answer. No more perfect suit. No more posture of a man used to others rising when he entered a room. Today, he was only a son waiting for his mother's answer the way a man waits for the final judgment of his life. Tun sat very still, both hands clasped tightly over his knees. His eyes were hollow from a night spent almost entirely awake. No one knew how many times, since sitting down there, he had repeated the same promises to himself. If his mother forgave him, he would rebuild everything. If she gave him one chance, he would make it right. If she would only look at him with a little less coldness, he would kneel again if he had to. But the longer he sat before her silence, the more he understood a bitter truth. There are some things in life you cannot negotiate like a contract. You cannot trade late sincerity for the wholeness of yesterday. At last Mama Ifunanya set her teacup down. The sound was very soft, but in that utterly still space, it made Tund lift his head immediately. She turned and looked at her son. Her eyes were still sad, very sad, but no longer as cold and sharp as they had been the night before. The pain in her was no longer burning. It had settled into something deeper, quieter, but also much farther away. "I do not curse you," she said. Her voice was small, slightly hoarse, but every word was clear. Tund swallowed hard. His lips trembled like a child, hearing something he had not dared hope for. "I do not want to see you destroyed either." That sentence made his eyes turn red instantly, because in the deepest pit of shame, perhaps the most painful thing for a child is not being hated by a mother. It is knowing that after everything, she still cannot bring herself to wish harm on him. Mama Ifunanya drew in a slow breath. She looked directly at Tund, as if she wanted every word she was about to say to enter him, remain inside him, and live with him for the rest of his life. "I only want you to remember for as long as you live," she said, "that what makes a human being is not money, but the way you treat those who are weaker than you." Tund lowered his head. Each word landed on his shoulders, not heavy in a crushing way, but heavy in the way that can never be lifted off again. She continued, her voice steady but deeper now. Zainab will face the consequences of what she has done. All of you will. No one interrupted. No one denied it. Because by now, even Tund understood. Consequences were no longer something that could be avoided with money, lawyers, or silence. An act that had gone too far would make its own path toward the price that had to be paid. Then Mama Ifunania paused. She looked out at the sunlit garden before her. A small bird landed on the edge of the fence, tilted its head, and sang a few bright, innocent notes, so innocent they almost did not belong in this story. And in that brief silence, Tund felt his heart tighten before she even spoke the next words. She said, giving a small shake of her head, will not return to that house. The air seemed to stop altogether. Tund did not move. He had told himself he was prepared for this from the moment he drove there. He had warned himself that if she said it, he had to accept it, that he had no right to beg, that forgiveness, if it came at all, did not mean everything could go back to the way it was. But hearing her say it out loud still hurt, as if someone were pulling a piece of him straight out of his chest. Mother, he whispered, so softly that saying it any louder might have made her decision feel even more real. Mama Ifunania turned to look at him. A home, she said, is not a place with beautiful lights, long tables, or tall walls. Every word was slow and clear. A home is a place where you are loved without having to be afraid. Tund closed his eyes, because with that one sentence, every layer of illusion he had used to decorate his life was stripped away. For years, he had believed he was giving his mother a better life. A larger mansion, a softer bed, more expensive food, more servants, but he had never once asked himself whether that place gave her peace. Mama Ifunania turned her face slightly toward the patch of sunlight spilling across the yard. And that place, she said, her voice dropping lower. I was afraid there for too long. There was no self-pity in the words, no dramatic accusation, no violent condemnation. And that made them hurt even more. Because Tund could hear in them not only the fear of one birthday night humiliation, but fear accumulated over many months, perhaps many years, the times she had stayed quiet under irritated glances, under the way people decided where she should sit, under the remarks that made her feel like an extra object in the very house her son had built. Tears fell onto the back of Tund's hand. This time, he did not wipe them away. And he did not plead anymore. He did not say, please give me a chance. He did not say, I will fix it. He did not say, please change your mind. Because at last, he understood a cruel but fair truth. Forgiveness does not mean returning. The absence of hatred does not mean everything remains intact. Dashed. And there are people you may still be allowed to call mother, while no longer having the right to call the place. They left their home. Only then did Ibrahim quietly rise and pull out Mama Ifunania's chair for her. A small gesture. But even in that small gesture was something the Bello mansion had lost long ago. Respect that did not need to announce itself. Mama Ifunania placed her hands on the chair and stood. The movement was still slow, still marked by age and exhaustion, but there was something in the way she stood today that was far straighter than before. Not because she hurt less, but because for the first time in a very long while, she was no longer standing in a place that forced her to shrink herself, just to survive. The morning breeze moved across the veranda. Birds sang in the sunlight. A new day had begun. There was no birthday music, no cake, no crystal glasses touching in fake laughter, no dazzling lights used to hide the rot underneath. There was only the truth that had made it through the storm, and what remained after it was dignity. Elsewhere, the Bello mansion still stood. The walls were still polished. The marble floors still reflected the light. Luxury cars still filled the garage. The household staff still moved through the halls in silence. On the outside, almost nothing had changed. But everyone knew, from the moment Mama Ifunania walked through that door and did not look back, that place was no longer a home. It was only a beautiful mansion, large, expensive, and empty. Empty because the thing that makes a home was never money. It was gratitude. It was decency. It was the way people treat those who sacrificed for them, when no one else was watching. And sometimes, a home does not collapse in flames. It collapses when the last person carrying its blessing quietly walks away. The next morning the sun rose beautifully, a beauty so gentle it almost felt cruel. Because after a long night in which too many things had collapsed, the light still arrived right on time, calmly spilling across Ibrahim Danjuma's garden, gliding over the tea table on the veranda, touching the leaves still jeweled with dew, then falling in warm golden patches across the spotless stone floor. Everything was so peaceful that, if you did not know what had happened, you might have thought this was just an ordinary morning, shared by people, living in order and decency. But none of the three people, seated around that tea table, were the same as they had been the day before. Mama Ifanania sat upright in a wicker chair, her aged hands wrapped around a warm teacup. The thin steam rose, brushed her face, and disappeared. She wore a simple pale cream outfit. Her silver hair had been neatly combed. Her face still carried the fatigue of someone who had not yet recovered from a wound that did not live in the body. To her right sat Ibrahim. He did not speak much. He simply sat there, quietly, like a source of support that did not need to display its strength. From time to time, he looked at Mama Ifunania with the gaze of a man who understood that some pain cannot be soothed with words, only honored through silent presence. Across from her sat Tund. He had been there since very early, before the first light had fully touched the garden. No phone vibrating endlessly in his hand anymore. No calls that needed answering. No perfect suit. No posture of a man accustomed to others rising when he entered a room. Today, he was only a son waiting for his mother's answer the way a man waits for the final judgment of his life. Tun sat very still, both hands clasped tightly over his knees. His eyes were hollow from a night spent nearly sleepless. No one knew how many times, since sitting there, he had told himself that if his mother forgave him, he would rebuild everything. If she gave him one chance, he would make it right. If she looked at him with even a little less coldness, he would kneel again if he had to. But the longer he sat before her silence, the more he understood a bitter truth. There are some things in life that cannot be negotiated like contracts. You cannot trade late sincerity for the wholeness of yesterday. At last, Mama Ifunania set her teacup down. The sound was very soft, but in that perfectly still space, it made Tund lift his head at once. She turned and looked at her son. Her eyes were still sad, very sad, but they no longer carried the sharp coldness of the night before. The pain in her was no longer blazing. It had settled into something deeper, quieter, but also much farther away. "I do not curse you," she said. Her voice was soft, slightly hoarse, but every word was clear. Tun swallowed hard. His lips trembled like a child hearing something he had not dared hope for. "And I do not want to see you destroyed." That sentence made his eyes redden instantly, because in the deepest part of shame, perhaps the most painful thing for a child is not being hated by his mother. It is knowing that after everything, she still cannot bring herself to wish him harm. Mama Ifunania drew in a slow breath. She looked directly at Tund, as if she wanted every word she was about to speak to enter him, remain within him, and live with him for the rest of his life. "I only want you to remember for the rest of your days," she said, "that what makes a person human is not money, but the way they treat those who are weaker than they are." Tund lowered his head. Each word landed on his shoulders, not heavy in a crushing way, but heavy in the kind of way that can never be lifted off again. She continued, her voice still even, but deeper now. "Zainab will face the consequences of what she has done. All of you will." No one interrupted. No one denied it, because by this point, even Tund understood. Consequences were no longer something that could be escaped with money, lawyers, or silence. An act that had gone too far would make its own way toward the price that had to be paid. Then Mama Ifananya paused. She looked out at the sunlit garden before her. A small bird landed on the edge of the fence, tilted its head, and let out a few bright, innocent notes, so innocent they almost did not belong to this story. And in that brief silence, Tund felt his heart tighten before she even spoke the next words. She gave a small shake of her head. "Will not go back to that house." The air seemed to stop altogether. Tund did not move. He had told himself he was prepared for this from the moment he drove there. He had warned himself that if she said it, he had to accept it, that he had no right to plead, that forgiveness, if it came at all, did not mean things would return to how they had been. But hearing her say it aloud still hurt, as if someone had reached into his chest and pulled a piece of him free. "Mother," he whispered, so softly that if he said it any louder, her decision might become even more real. Mama Ifunanya turned to look at him. "A home," she said, "is not a place with beautiful lights, long tables, or tall walls." Each word was slow and clear. "A home is a place where you are loved without having to be afraid." Tund closed his eyes, because with that one sentence, every layer of illusion he had used to decorate his life was stripped away. For years, he had believed he was giving his mother a better life, a larger mansion, a softer bed, more expensive food, more servants. But he had never once asked himself whether that place gave her peace. Mama Ifunanya turned her face slightly toward the sunlight stretched across the yard. "And that place," she said, her voice dropping lower. "I was afraid there for too long." There was no self-pity in those words, no blame, no dramatic condemnation. And that was exactly why they hurt even more. Because Tund could hear in them not only the fear of one birthday night, of humiliation, but a fear that had gathered over many months, perhaps many years, the times she had gone silent under impatient glances, under the way people decided where she should sit, under remarks that made her feel like an unwanted object inside the very house her son had built. Tears fell onto the back of Tund's hand. This time, he did not wipe them away, and he no longer tried to hold on. He did not say, "Please give me a chance." He did not say, "I'll fix it." He did not say, "Please reconsider." Because at last he understood a cruel but fair truth. Forgiveness does not mean returning. The absence of hatred does not mean everything remains intact. And there are people you may still be allowed to call mother, while no longer having the right to call the place they left their home. Only then did Ibrahim quietly rise and pull out Mama Ifunania's chair for her. A small gesture. But even in that small gesture was something the Bello mansion had lost long ago. Respect that did not need to announce itself. Mama Ifunania placed her hands on the chair and stood. The movement was still slow, still marked by age and exhaustion. But there was something in the way she stood today that was far straighter than before. Not because she hurt less, but because for the first time in a very long while, she was no longer standing in a place that forced her to shrink herself just to survive. The morning breeze moved across the veranda. Birds sang in the sunlight. A new day had begun. There was no birthday music, no cake, no crystal glasses touching in false ladder, no dazzling lights used to hide the rot underneath. There was only the truth that had come through the storm, and what remained after it was dignity. Elsewhere, the Bello mansion still stood. Its walls were still polished. Its marble floors still reflected the light. Luxury cars still filled the garage. The household staff still moved through the halls in silence. Outwardly, almost nothing had changed. But everyone knew, from the night Mama Ifunanya walked through that door and did not look back, that place was no longer a home. It was only a beautiful mansion, large, expensive, and empty. Empty because the thing that keeps a house a home was never money. It was gratitude. It was decency. It was the way people treat those who sacrificed for them when no one else was watching. And sometimes, a home does not collapse in flames. It collapses when the last person carrying its blessing quietly walks away. There are mothers who spend their entire lives quietly, becoming the foundation their children climb on. They do not demand credit. They do not demand repayment. They do not need to be praised before a crowd. They only hope that at the end of their lives, they will not be turned away from by the very child they brought into the world at the moment they are weakest. But life always finds a way to remember what people want to forget, and when consequences come, they do not always knock with thunder. Sometimes, they arrive through a camera that does not lie, an old file buried for too long, and a mother who quietly walks away, carrying with her the last warmth of a home. If you are still listening, leave me a comment and let me know. Where in the world are you watching from? And if this story touched you, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss stories that make us do more than just watch. They make us stop and look at ourselves. Remember this, money can build a mansion, but only gratitude can keep a home.